Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement, and your host for this series. I want to just get the conversation going. I'm so pleased to introduce Andrea Carlisle. She's the author of the book that we're going to be focusing on today, There Was an Old Woman, Reflections on These Strange, Surprising, Shining Years. Her work's been published in literary journals, newspapers, magazines, anthologies, and by independent presses. Go Ask Alice, when she's 94, was her popular blog about her mother and brought attention to aging and caregiving before they became subjects of national interest. She's received fellowships from the Oregon Institute of Literary Arts and the Oregon Arts Commission. In March 2024, Electric Lit published her most recent essay, 7 Novels About Women Over 60 Who Defy Societal Expectations. And that article, and as well as another, are on the event page. They're there for you to read. And there are many other wonderful articles that are on her website, and we'll talk more about that later. I am just so delighted to have Andrea here. I met Andrea through Jan Hively, who many of you know, who now lives out in Portland. She introduced me to the book and to Andrea, and so I'm so delighted to have you here. And I have read the book, and I must say, I've said this to Andrea, I just love the book. It just resonates with me. We're of the same, as I said to her, the same vintage. She's 79, I'm 78, and I know many of you on the call are similar ages, some younger, some older, and if we're all so lucky, we will all become older in a variety of ways. With that introduction, welcome, Andrea, and maybe we can start with just what inspired you to write this wonderful book, There Was an Old Woman, Reflections on These Strange, Surprising, Shining Years.
Dory, thank you for having me today and for that wonderful introduction. I'm so glad you liked the book. I wasn't really thinking of writing a book until my mother moved to Oregon from Iowa, and I started keeping a blog about our relationship when she lived here for 7 years. So for those 7 years, I wrote about aging, her aging primarily, not mine. And I thought about it and I read about it, a lot of books, and I just got really curious about it. Then after my mother died at the age of 100, I really missed her, and I noticed that I was getting old, and the whole time she was here, and I was focused on her aging. I was aging myself, and my experience and her experience did not seem to line up with what I was given to understand being old meant. I began to write these pieces as I began to think more and more about what growing older meant to me, and that's how the book came into existence.
And can you share a little? We'll get back to that later, but it's an interesting title that you have, There Was an Old Woman, and it is a play on kind of nursery rhymes. And can you maybe talk about how you chose that title and how it resonates for you and what you're trying to do in the book?
Yes, There Was an Old Woman. I think many people immediately go to The Old Woman in the Shoe or another nursery rhyme or two in which an old woman appears. And I do have some of these, as you said, as I've said before, in the book itself, they're sprinkled through There Was an Old Woman rhymes. But really, I wanted to have it be part of the title because I think claiming these years when I'm old frees me from having to defend myself against ageism. I can use that energy for more important things, and it's not just the word old, but my understanding that this is where I am in life now. This is my experience. The word old, calling myself old, helps me be more curious about what I'm experiencing rather than trying to pretend something else is going on. So I guess it's a psychological thing for me. It pushes down that wall that so many of us have, that where we want to deny where we are at this point in life. I think the word old sums that up for me, and it lets me wander around in the experience and wonder about it. I'm not defending myself against it. I'm trying to embrace it.
Can you say more about that? Because you do talk in the book in such a lovely way about that not everybody is comfortable with the word old, but that there's just expanding on what you were saying about how for you it's really freeing to just say, yeah, I am. But that's okay, because you go into how who you are now, it so relates to who you've been in these different stages of your life. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
I think that me to say that I'm old, first of all, it's even me to sometimes.
It's what? Say again.
It shocks even me to myself here and to be claiming it. Sometimes I have to go back to square one and say, why am I saying this when so many people are repulsed by the word? Why am I doing this? I don't mind the word older either. I think older is a fine word. I'm 79. I identify as female. Yeah, that kind of makes me an old woman. And I want to take it on. I want to explore it. I want to understand not understand, that's not the right word. I want to be engaged with an inquiry into what it means to me, what it means to my friends. And not any two people seem to feel the same way about growing older. Everybody has such an individual experience. Some are presented with so many challenges and that don't like it at all. Some have pretty much nothing going on, and then there's everything in between. And so I can understand why some people would want to say, I'm not old, I don't feel old, or on the other end, I feel terribly old, I feel older than old, and I don't like it. I understand all these different reactions to it. I just want to put it out there, a way to open the door into conversation. The whole book is really to start a conversation about what it means to us to be in these years now.
And I think it accomplishes that, because you, just as you were saying, the kind of being curious about it. And I love this line that you have when you were talking about an example of somebody you knew, Marie, and talking about the living, breathing set of contradictions that we are probably at any stage of life, but maybe it's more apparent as we're older, of dealing with the changes in our own bodies, recognizing there's still that adolescent in us and in the older person. And you do such a beautiful way of weaving that in. Can you maybe talk a little more about that too?
About weaving in the contradictions?
Yeah, the contradictions and the parallels of adolescence to now.
There's an essay in the book called The Second Coming of Age. That essay, in that I'm trying to say, what other time of life did we face all these huge physical changes and challenges socially, psychologically? And I look back and it seems like adolescence was the obvious time. And when I started looking at my own adolescence, I realized, gosh, I had some real challenges entering that. My brother, when I was 13, when I was just starting adolescence, my brother died by suicide. So I carried that into those years, and my family fell apart in some ways. So I looked back at those years to see what helped me get through them. And I realized that reading and writing were the things that I leaned on the most. That's when I really started to write. And so I started to wonder, can we use that time of our lives to help us now as we go through these years? What did we do then that helped us? It was even more of a challenge. The changes were so fast. When you think of it, between 12 and 20, how much our bodies change, our social life changes. We go from grade school to junior high to high school to college if we're lucky, and then enter the workforce. Just a huge number of changes in such a short amount of time. And how did we do it? What did we use to support ourselves? How did we get support from friends? What kinds of questions were we asking ourselves? What were we telling ourselves? I think all of that, Dory, is what I meant by the second coming of age, by using those, that we have those resources in ourselves. We did it before, we can do it again. And we just need to look back and think about it and know that we're strong enough to do this too, because we did that, which was actually a lot harder.
And I think that's such a beautiful part of the book, of the resilience and the perspective, I think, of knowing, as you say, that we did it before and we can do it again. And you also, and I think even your living environment now, if you want to maybe share, because I think it's such wonderful, the role of friendship and community and how important that is at each of the stages, but particularly now, how we need and how important it is to call that forward, to know we're not alone or don't have to be alone. Maybe some people are, unfortunately, but perhaps there are ways of connecting with people around this stage of life that helps us connect and be curious and resourceful and not have to be isolated. Can you share a little of your community? Yeah, no, go ahead. I don't want to make it a closed question.
I feel really lucky because I moved into a houseboat in my 30s. I don't live in the same houseboat, but I live on the same moorage 45 years later. I've grown old with a community, a houseboat community. We were all pretty young when we moved here. And it's not to say that this is a static community. It does change. New people move in. Some people move out. Although I have to say, not many people want to move out. We all know each other. We've known each other, some of us, for this entire 45 years. And it's a beautiful spot, and it's across from an island that a lot of people who are in Portland area know and love to hike around on. It's an island that's basically a bird sanctuary. So there are a lot of raptors that I see every day here, eagles and herons. Not herons aren't raptors, but eagles and hawks. And it's just the bird life is just tremendous. And it's a gorgeous spot. And my neighbors are lovely people. There are about 30 houseboats here, and we take care of each other. It's an unusual setting to grow old in, but it's really great because of how we know each other and help each other. So
it's what you have is what's often referred to as a naturally occurring retirement community, where you all moved in younger and have kind of some people moving in and some out, but for a major part of you, you've been there and know each other over time and are supportive, and you also bring in, I think what's so important as we get older, the role of nature. You have a wonderful part of the walk, the kind of the Japanese influence of thinking about the forest path, walking through the forest.
Oh, yes.
And the role of walking and talking, the community and the camaraderie and nature, all of those are such important ways to nurture ourselves, I think, as we get older.
Yes, I think the daily walk that I do with anywhere between 1 and 4 other older women who live here, those daily walks have really saved me. I don't think I like being outside, but I really like being in the company of these women who are such interesting women. And we walk together every day. We laugh a lot. We talk about a lot of different things. Someone asked me recently, aren't we just all going over and over our past? And I said, no, that's not really even what most older people talk about. That's the stereotype. We talk about what's right in front of us right now, what's going on in our lives. We talk about politics. We talk about our work. We talk about nature. We point things out to each other. So there is an essay about these walks in the book called Old is a Long Walk. And it's been such a pleasure for all these years to go for walks with these women.
It just sounds so important of the friendship and the community. You've divided the book into 3 parts. Can you tell us about what the parts are and why you organized it in the way that you did?
I started to think about how to organize it a long time ago. As I said, I just started writing these essays without really thinking, without having a book in mind. But as I got more serious about them, I thought really trying to say here, how am I, if I'm going to keep writing about this, what are the areas that interest me the most about getting older? In the book, the first part is called Old is a Long Walk. It's the title of that one essay. And I think I named it that because we do go for walks, but old is a long walk. It just is. People think of old age as a fixed point, but it's actually can last up to 40 years if you start counting at, say, age 60, as some people do. And as I said earlier, my mother lived to be 100, so there's 40 years. That's a long time. And in that first section, I wanted to talk about some of the realities of my life now at this sort of middle part of, I think they call it, there's something called young old age, middle old age, and old age that divide us up into. But in that first section, I was just trying to give a sense of my own life. I wanted to include things like where I live on this houseboat and these people that I walk with every day. I wanted to talk about what we mentioned about how my time as an adolescent helped me better cope with what's happening with me now. We talked about how I was for 7 years a caregiver to my mother, and some other things like hair loss and trying to deal with the past and how much stuff I should keep and universal things that come with being older. And I guess I just wanted the reader to know who I am. So I was trying to use stories to draw out some of the universal experiences of aging and illustrate my perspective for now. So that Old is a Long Walk is the first part of the book. Part 2 is called There Was an Old Woman. And that looks at this creature we've been given to understand an old woman is. Who do we mean when we say the old woman or an old woman? And this was a really interesting part of the book to write. I went looking for her in art and literature and children's stories. And I found that the old woman is very often presented in what you'd call stereotypical ways that don't really serve us. They don't serve you if you actually are an old woman to find yourself represented in some of these fairy tales. And for example, in fairy tales, the old woman is often pitted against children. She wants to eat them or kill them or shove them into her oven or trap them in a tower. She's a bad character. And then I was also I looked at fairy tales and nursery rhymes, but then I also, in that section, I'm looking at children's literature. and how in the art and children's literature, the old woman really comes across as she often has a kind of distorted body. If you start looking at those illustrations in children's books, you'll see it. She has maybe a small head and a huge body, or she's wearing some crazy clothes that you or nobody you know would ever wear, or she's got a big head and a small body. It's crazy how many different ways she's represented as physically distorted. Sometimes she's really ugly. In fact, often she's really ugly. She's a caricature. And in fine art, even, she's repulsive in some way, or she's vain in some way beyond belief. I just wanted to get into all of that and look at it and draw lines to my own life and say, this is what I've been given to understand being an old woman is. But is this actually who I am and what I'm seeing around me? No, it isn't. So that's the second part of the book. And part 3 is called Weathering. And I didn't want to write this book without saying there are some really damn hard things that you have to go through in this part of life. And I realize that loss does not just belong to the old. We lose people throughout our lives. You get sick throughout our lives. But I did want to say that this is a time of loss of you lose your parents, you lose some friends, you lose that whole old guard of older relatives that helped take care of you when you were a young person, or at least they did in my case. And I just never imagined this depth of grief. I know that I watched my own parents lose friends, and I thought that's just how it is. We're old, people go. But now I think about that, and I think, why didn't I ask them more about what it felt like to lose these people who were so dear to them, who knew things about them that nobody else knew and took care of them in all kinds of situations. And then I wanted to write about how hard it is sometimes to watch friends and relatives deal with physical loss and physical things about themselves that are lost for good, and dealing with that. It's not particularly, it sounds depressing, but it isn't. It's just true. It's just true. But I also use that section too about what we learn about throughout our lives about how to cope with these things. And there's a lot there. We have a lot more resources now to deal with, for example, grief, I think, than we did when we were maybe 20 or 16 or 35. And there's a lot of pleasure. And in that section, I try to talk about that too. So those are the 3 sections and what they cover.
Yeah, and I have to say, I did not, I didn't find the last section depressing. It was real. It's just the reality of what, the longer we live, the more we have to deal with the losses and changes and transitions and all of that. There's a comment from somebody listening who doesn't say who it is, but just says, seeing my extended family die off one by one has been incredibly hard for me. I feel like there's almost no one left who knew me as a child or a teen.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the experience of it. As I mentioned, those of you who might have come on long, I really totally recommend Andrea's beautiful book. It's just every essay gets you thinking about yourself as well as the society and the ageism around us, as well as internalized ages. And then I think part of your invite to us is thinking about who are we as we're getting older? What are our stories so we can break apart some of those stereotypes? But back to the way you structured the book, what was your favorite section to write, and why was that?
First, I just wanted to say to the person who wrote about losing all of those people, I remember for me that year was 2000, where I lost my dad, 2 aunts, and an uncle, and having that exact same feeling of, oh my goodness, these are the people who really knew me as a young person. And how can I come to terms with this? These are these are people of my heart and my history. And it is no small thing to lose them. And so for me, the way I try to remember them is to write about them. I know I have friends who like candles. I have friends who still celebrate the birthdays of their mothers or fathers or uncles or aunts. They go out and make a toast and recall memories of them. Yeah, that's a very big thing. That's been a big thing for me too. But my favorite section, is that what you asked? My favorite section?
I did, but you can stay with, I just realized when you were saying that, it just resonated with me too, of just how hard it is when we lose people and how there aren't necessarily people who knew us back when. I know I had that earlier because we moved around a lot. And so it's been so important to me that I have a few friends from at least age 16 onward, and actually one from age 13 onward, although we don't see each other that much. And there's something so important to have that when there aren't others in the family network necessarily who knew us.
Huh? Yeah, those friends that we met when we were I have a friend that I've known since I was 13 also. Yeah. It is a challenging time. There is no time of life, though, that isn't challenging in some way. This is just the flavor of this particular time.
And I think your focus on the role writing has played for you. Maybe that can be something helpful for myself and all the listeners to think about, too, that it's through sitting, reflecting, sifting, writing, sharing that or even doing a videotaping our stories or stuff, but how important it is to try to figure out how we want to tell our story, and even if it's just for ourselves, or is it part of our legacy, or who are we now that has developed from the who we were and what those experiences were like throughout our lives.
Just the other night, I was cleaning out a basket of journals, and I picked up one of the journals, and it was all about my brother, Michael, who died in Bob. And I started keeping a journal about him not long after he died, and it was just memories of us. Mm-hmm. I had no memory, actually, of writing it, but I was reading through it, and I was remembering him again, and I was going through page after page of good times and good connections we had, and it called him back to me again. And it was a really satisfying experience to come across that. I'm not much of a journal keeper, but boy, keeping that particular journal was not all that long, but it meant a lot to me the other night as I was going through it. It meant a lot to meet him again in that way. I think, any way that we can create around just what we're doing, we are now, and also create ways to remember people. Anything we can do is worthwhile.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now back to the other question, which was of those sections.
But
what was your favorite section to write, and why was that?
Oh, I think it was probably the second part, the part that's called "There Was an Old Woman," that I was just talking about. When I was looking at children's literature and adult literature about older women and fine art, and how these images and stories seep into our self-perception, I guess doing it was just really a deep dive for me. One of the books that I read was called The History of Old Age. I didn't really read it. It's a collection of essays about art with a lot of examples of painting of old people. And it was just a fascinating experience for me. I sat outside and I just poured through this book really slowly, but looking at all these images of older people and how artists saw them, and in particular, how artists saw the old woman and strange representations of her. I just thought, what in the heck is going on here? Was this just sexism? And I think I concluded that it was. It's just these images of women that are filtered through male eyes that are presented to us as if this is it. It was just fascinating to me to write about that and to read children's books, and including older ones and more recent ones where there's, a lot of really ugly representations of this. One thing I did when I was writing that section was I Googled something like caricatures of old women, because I thought, where did these ideas come from? And I guess a caricature is like what our mind calls forth for a cartoon image. If we say fireman, into our head pops an image of a big guy with a lot of protective gear on and holding a hose. I just wondered what comes into our mind when we think old woman. What's the caricature that comes to mind? I recommend Googling caricatures of old woman and just brace yourself for what pops to people's minds first when they think about that. Just look at some pages of those images. So anyway, I was doing kind of experiments like that with myself. So I think is why it was a fun and interesting part to write. And I did want to explore the old woman in movies too. I wanted that to be part of the section, but I didn't get enough time to do that before the book needed to be completed. But I really love it when there's a film in which an older woman is in the lead role. She has some energy, or she's unforgettable in some way. I think the first time I ever saw that was in Harold and Maude. Yeah. But I also was thinking about that movie and how Maude is such an interesting person, but she kills herself because she's 80. Now that I'm close to 80, I'm not quite as fond of that film as I used to be. But then there are these movies that I think, why are they even bothering? The Book Club franchise with Jane Fonda and Mary Steenburgen and Kenneth Bergen. I do think it's healthy to get images of older women and sexuality in front of cameras and just say, okay, this is true for this time of life too, but some of them are just so silly and demeaning. I felt the same way about Hello, My Name is Doris, that was so popular a few years ago. But there are movies I really liked, and I've really gone back to again and again. One of them is Strangers in Good Company. Do you know that movie? It's a Canadian
I don't know that one. Yeah, I'm writing it down. So I'm going to see it.
Yeah, it was created really a long time ago in the 80s. But my mother and I both watched it, and we're 30 years apart. We both really loved it. It's a bunch of women who get stranded out in the wilderness together. They're on a bus tour, and they get stranded. The bus breaks down, and it's just a beautiful film. And I liked Our Souls at Night, which is based on a novel by Kent Knuth. And to me, that movie took on loneliness and desire in a way that I hadn't, between two older people, in a way that I found unexpected. And Nomadland, I liked. Good Luck to You, Rio Grande, I really liked. If Farewell. But you mentioned in a recent that there's a movie that you liked a lot.
I just saw one the other night. It's relatively new. It's called Slip Away, and it's got this wonderful actress in it, Elaine Partnow, Partnow. Her husband had died, and before he had died, bought this sailboat that she ends up selling her house and living on the boat. And it's just first of all, she's beautiful. Her face and when she says in the movie, I'm 80, and when she's on the boat, and basically it's this really lovely intergenerational kind of thing where she is helped by and helps an aspiring pianist who's been on drugs and stuff. There's this intergenerational thing, and then the conflict with her daughter. She has early onset, maybe not early onset, but she's got some dementia. Yes, there's some pill she's taking, and anyway, it's beautiful. And she was beautiful, and just her joy in just everyday life. So I had mentioned it to you. I can't remember if it was on Netflix, but I think I looked it up and you can see it on YouTube. Yeah. And I think it was just in the last few years. And I really loved it. I don't want to give it away, but it's just her joy of life and how she really helps this troubled young man. And there's the ups and downs of the character development, but he helps her kind of end her life on her own terms. And I thought it was lovely. But maybe you'll write an article then focusing on some of the movies. And I do want to mention for people who, first of all, one of the articles that is on the event page has a number of books that Andrea mentions, but also in her book, there's a list of some wonderful books that she recommends. I must say that second part, too, was so illuminating. Men are just not portrayed in the same way. Men are the handsome, whatever, the debonair, but it's so amazing, the caricature of older women. And I loved your little part. Could you just tell a little about the Queen and I chapter? I loved your way of dealing with Snow White.
That essay is really about vanity and how,
right.
And how Snow White is really a story about vanity. And the Queen, maybe a lot of your listeners, maybe some of them anyway, are around our age and maybe saw the Snow White the Disney version. And that version, Snow White, the Queen, is probably around 40. She looks to be no older than considered done for. She's over. And now it's Snow White's domain, the whole kingdom. It's her land. Everybody's expecting her to be or thinks of her as the most beautiful. And just a story about a lot of things, young versus old, which I think that young versus old story is told over and over again. And the movie that you just described is the opposite of that. And that those kinds of stories that I think are much more interesting. And you can see also the young versus old played out on social media like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, where younger people, what is that? It's essentially, it's okay boomer. That came up. You have to indulge these old people. And I'm sure it makes people smirk or sneer or laugh or whatever for a few seconds, but it is not the story that most of us experience between generations. I certainly haven't experienced that. Anyway, The Queen and I also looks at how that desire to please a male audience, and the mirror, when the Queen looks in the mirror, it's a male voice that tells her she's had it. She is no longer the one who's the most beautiful. How that desire has really gone deep in women and created I think it's something like a $67 billion per year industry of anti-aging products. And so I'm not saying it's wrong to use those products. I'm just, as that essay and me personally in the world, I sort of question what's so wrong? What's so wrong with aging? Why do we think the aging phase is so bad? And what would it be like to live without fear of our faces changing and becoming older? What would that world be?
Yeah, such an important question. So what do you think we can do as individuals to separate ourselves from all of those stereotypes. They're out there. And I guess part is just living the best lives we can, showing people what aging can offer. But what are ways, because it's so pervasive, particularly in our country, but because I think elders are viewed in different ways in some cultures, but here there's such caricatures and stereotypes.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, that people do learn by watching others how they grow old and what they have to say about it. But I learned through people who push back at stereotypes, who say out loud, this isn't right. This is not my experience. This is not my idea of a joke or a birthday card, or this is not an image I can relate to. I've learned from those people and who say, I'll tell you my experience. Here's my story of what my life is like. And I think that we can stop telling jokes about ourselves. I think that will help one by one, but it's really how it's done, right? Mm-hmm. That will help wish some of the stereotypes. I think people saying, oh, I'm having a senior moment, funny, but I forgot my car seats when I was 25, so I don't know if it was a senior moment. I forgot the names of people. I've always had I can be introduced to I was introduced to somebody at a party I remember was very embarrassing for me when I was in my early 30s, and then I had to introduce that person immediately to someone else, and I didn't know his name. We can make fun of ourselves or take things lightly. I think that's fine, but also be aware of what you're doing. You're also perpetuating a way for people to see you and to see old age as something that may or may not really be accurate. And one thing I'm going to say, I wanted to be sure to say is, as something we can do if we are grandparents or great aunts or great uncles or just an older neighbor friend, we can buy picture books to read to grandchildren or nieces or whatever that represent older people in a normal kind of way. And I give some examples in my book, but it's just amazing to me to see people who wouldn't think of reading a racist children's book to their grandchild, but they don't think anything of reading an ageist one, even though they themselves are the target of that ageism in that book. So if you have some of those books around with false or distorted images of older people and you sit down with a grandchild or a younger person with that book, it would be interesting to read to them and then ask questions. Why do you think the child in this story looks normal, but the older person doesn't look like me, doesn't look like your other grandmother, doesn't look quite like anybody we know? Why do you think the artist is making an old person look so weird? What do you think this book is trying to tell you about being old? Do you want to believe it? Do you believe this? Just to have a conversation with younger people about what they're seeing, I think will do a lot to break up stereotypes. If you ask children, Becca Levy, who writes about ageism and aging, said that in some of her research, she learned that children as young as three, if you ask them, do you want to become old? They will say no, afraid of being old. And one of those reasons is picture book. So anyway, I wanted to be sure to say that.
Oh, no, that's great. Yeah, great point.
There's a website called A is for Aging, created by Lindsay McGovitt, that has all kinds of books picture books that have multicultural, intergenerational stories. It's a great resource. A is for Aging. Check that out if you need.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And Betsy from Durham says in our country, the very first people honored and even venerated elder women were Native American. And they still look to old women for wisdom and advice. Why do we continue not to listen to them, she asks.
Yes, why do we continue not to listen to that? I wonder if, Betsy, if you know the book Two Old Women, it's a retelling of an Athabascan legend about two older women who weren't really contributing much to their tribe in a rough winter and in Alaska. And so the tribe decided we've had enough. We can barely feed ourselves. And so we're leaving you behind. They leave these two old women behind in the wilderness on their own. And I won't say any more because I'll ruin the story for you, but it's wonderful. It's by Velma Wallace, Walis, who's Native American, and it's just a beautiful book. I recommend it.
You mentioned the story in your book too, and
yes, it's really
another great resource. Yeah, but can you talk a little about the role of the pandemic and how it's played into ageism? I know you comment a little in the book, but just some quickie thoughts. We're almost at the top of the hour, and I want to respect that. But I think the pandemic is just important to maybe just ask you about.
I think, and I know COVID is still around based on statistics, and my life is still, I wear a mask whenever I go out. I'm sometimes the only one in a grocery store with a mask on, or department store or wherever, but I'm wearing my mask. I think there's been a collective decision that the old and the compromised are just the price we have to pay for being free. And I'm not just really wondering what kind of people we've become that we think that's okay. But when COVID first hit, I spent almost a year entirely by myself. And that's when, I write about this in the book, it's when I started drawing for the first time since I was 12. And what an experience that was and what I learned from it. But I do think that the pandemic has really shoved the old and disabled people with disabilities and people who are compromised into the margin. And to speak up, and if this is something that bothers you, speak up about it, because the more we talk about it, the more I think it'll make people uncomfortable, but also that's how I change. I'm uncomfortable about something and I look at it and think, do I want to hold on to this, or is this discomfort telling me that it's not the right path? Yeah. Does that answer your question, Dory?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the underlying part I hear is the importance of kind of thinking about and questioning. It's also tied into the beautiful description you gave of great aunts or grandparents or whomever or parents to talk with their kids or neighbors or whoever to question stereotypes and the same kind of things when it comes to these assumptions or stereotypes that people have in terms of, I still wear masks every time I go into a place too, so I want to respect that I have immune issues and that's just life. But so Betsy did send me her address and she said she has read Two Old Women.
Oh, good.
I just wanted to comment on that. As we pull it together, what would you like readers to take away from the book and from this conversation? I think,
I'd love this conversation. Thank you again for inviting me. I guess I just would like people to reflect on what we've talked about and to look at where they got their ideas about being old and were they reliable sources? How much did you take from the culture about being old that you're now living out that maybe you can let go of? And think about examples of older women who were in your life and what the differences are between stereotypes and those older women and how they can lead you into new ways of thinking about being old just based on their experience. I don't think the antidote to negativity about old age is positivity in this case. I think it's fine to be positive, but like some of those movies that I mentioned that kind of overthink the antidote to negativity in the case of ageism, is just to tell our own truths as we can without holding back because we assume no one's interested or it's too complicated or whatever reasons we use that we were probably given from someone else to silence ourselves. I think we just need to try with all of our hearts and spirits to push those aside. I just want us to live these years out loud, to say what it is and watch what we say about ourselves. And yeah, I hope. I personally had hope for wisdom. I thought that was going to be the big prize for getting older. But when I was writing this book, I thought, yeah, I don't know how many people really get wise just by growing old. I think it comes to a few, but what I do think is these years give us a perspective on life that's new and different, and we can pay attention to that. We've learned things, and when appropriate, we can share those things.
Well, I think that's so beautifully said. I'm so appreciative of you being here. Let's just real quickly, though, before we sign off, tell people your website so that they can...
It's just my name, AndreaCarlisle.com. And I wanted to say one more thing, that at my very first reading, there was an audience member who stood up and said this would make a good book club book. You can, if you want to, there are some book clubs that have done that, and I've attended a couple of those on Zoom. You can contact me at AndreaCarlisle.com. If you have a book club and you want to do a Zoom call with me, I'd be glad to do that. I don't charge anything. I just love the conversation. And I'll show up if my schedule allows it and the timing is right. So I wanted to tell that.
What a wonderful gift. And I must say I'm part of 2 different book clubs, and I have a feeling we'll take you up on that.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm just so delighted that this worked out for you to join us today. And as I said at the beginning and throughout, that I just think it's a gem of a book, and it's full of things to think about our own selves and aging and who we are now, and to be proud of it. And I love that live our years out loud, tell our stories. I think that's great.
Let's do it.
Advice. Let's do it. Thank you so much being with us today, and thank you all you'll get a recording link after the call, and Betsy, you'll get your copy of a book. And Betsy did comment that, which is another whole thing, but just it's interesting because it's tied into it. She says she's 74 and her daughter does not like that and is having trouble accepting that she's 74, older. So we have a lot on many levels to deal with in our own families.
I just said what I'd give to be 74 again.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Great. Take care. Yeah, stay well. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.